interview.
A lot of questions, came about the first time that we were trying to go into further depth here, like how do the skylines work? What's it like to be with Elizabeth, moment to moment? What's going on with these tears in the world? What is, is it just, are you just dealing with these sort of ultra nationalist founders, or are there other groups, in Colombia? So yeah, I think we're just sort of expanding upon those themes. Also trying to show, we've had another year of development, so we can actually show things that are much more, representative of final gameplay too. Our goal with Elizabeth was to basically expand the player's vocabulary. Besides let's leave the narrative stuff aside for a second, but in terms of gameplay, we really want to expand the player's vocabulary. So what Elizabeth can do for you is that she opens these things called tears in the world, and basically she can bring in things into our world that don't currently exist in our world. But everybody can see them, but she's the only one who can bring them in. So for instance, you might be in a combat and you're in a really tough spot, and you saw some of this in the demo, and you see a tear with a turret that you could potentially bring in, that she could potentially bring in for you. You see a tear with another skyline that maybe you could use. You see a tear with you're fighting some Vox Populi, one faction, maybe you can bring in members of the opposing faction, the founders, to help you. But you can only bring in one of those things in this particular combat situation. And you have to tell Elizabeth which one to bring in. And so you go through the game, and like maybe in a later combat, you'll see 5 things you potentially bring in, but later on, Elizabeth's grown more confident in her ability. She can bring in 2 of those 5. And so it's a really nice way, besides your traditional, your weapons and your in one hand your powers, in the other hand they're called vigors in this game. It's another tool that's very much placed in the world, but I'm going to do it one way, and you're going to do it a different way, and I'm going to bring in the turret, you're going to bring in the founders. Another guy may bring in an entranceway to another part of the level, which you can only get at through a tear. So there's lots of different options that this opens up for the gamer.
The needs of our great city of Colombia must come before the desires of any foreigner, whether they be enemy or friend.
In Bioshock 1, I think I gave this example earlier when I talked to people, that you basically arrive after the party's over in Bioshock 1, and you're sort of being an archaeologist discovering what happened. And we like that, and we did that. In that world, you heard the audio logs, and you sort of saw the visual evidence of what remained, but it was fairly static. We really wanted to challenge ourselves to have you really arrive when the party's just starting in Infinite. In fact, rescuing Elizabeth from this tower where she's been trapped is one of the key things that sets the whole thing into motion. It accelerates the conflict that's going on between the founders and the Vox Populi. And so for us, we want to tell a lot of the story that's happened in the present tense rather than in the past tense. That is, I think, rewarding for the player, really rewarding for the player, but it's also really challenging, because all of a sudden we have, like the very opening of the demo you saw, it's a very traditional Bioshock moment. You're going through a store and you're looking for loot, right? And in Bioshock 1, that would have been an experience where you're just quietly going through the store, picking stuff up. But here, Elizabeth's commenting on stuff, Booker's commenting on stuff. There's some light moments of Liz just kind of joking around. There's her commentary. You see this sort of like very traditional Bioshock moment. You see this solid mattress on the ground and all these weapons around it and stuff. And and Booker says something effective. Looks like a real desperate type was holed up here. And Liz says, "Oh, what does that make us?" And you've got a sense of where the player is in the story, some commentary from the characters of where the player is in the story. By having these voices, you also have, because not everybody you encounter immediately aggroes on you, you have this opportunity for storytelling that you didn't have in a previous Bioshock game. Like in Bioshock 1, there's a part where you sort of come up this elevator at the very beginning, and you see a woman with a baby carriage, we call the baby carriage splicer, and she's singing this creepy song to the baby carriage. It turns out there's a gun in it. And we started by this saying, what would be really great? What if she didn't automatically attack you when she saw you? Because we had to turn her back to the player, because the moment that she saw the player, she'd come after him. And we said, what if, you were in a world where much more like the real world, where like not everybody you see comes after you with a gun, and not everybody you see you shoot. And strangely, that's counterintuitive for a shooter, right? Because in real life, that's for most normal people fairly intuitive. Don't shoot people when you see them necessarily, unless there's a real threat. In a shooter, it's counterintuitive, and we had this challenge on Bioshock 1 where we had to train the player not to shoot the Big Daddy the moment they saw them. And here we sort of had to expand that training to be like, okay, you're going to be going through the world, and you see in the demo, Booker doesn't actually get into a combat until fairly late in the demo. And he could have, there's lots of opportunities he could have gotten to combats, and there's lots of moments where I'm sure he's sort of like got his hand on his gun, you know, the player's got that feeling of, my hand's on my gun, I'm not sure whether I should engage here. Actually, he draws on one guy at one point, and that fight could have gone, that could have turned into a fight. It depends, and sometimes Booker if he waits too long, maybe people will get the drop on him, and that would be bad for him too. But we really just want to expand the vocabulary for a shooter of what that dynamic is of going through this dangerous world, but that's not necessarily binarily dangerous, where everybody sees you immediately attacks you. So the way, if you think about the skylines, we kind of think of it like, you ever play the game Tricky back in the day? It's really easy to get down the hill poorly, to do it without doing well down the hill. And I think it's sort of like that. I could bring you in the room and you actually sit down in front of it. It's actually relatively straightforward to jump because you actually just look. There's a couple ways to get around, and we're still evolving it. But currently, you just sort of look at a point and you hit the bumper, and your Booker will automatically make the right jump, presuming that it's within certain constraints. You can make that jump. We're also experimenting with just using the left stick to flick from line to line and things like that. That we want to basically make it about him making the right choices on the line, not can he physically make a jump and land it. It's not like a Mario, an old school Mario game where you're trying to hit platforms. He won't make jumps and miss them because we don't think that's very interesting. He'll make jumps that are tactically bad for him, and tactically, put himself in a really tough spot. But because it is a lot to take in, right? It's a lot to manage, a lot to handle. So it's about getting good. Songbird is a creature that, and I think you'll have for your audience a piece of art to show sort of how he's presented to the world of Columbia. He's got a couple of purposes in the world. One, he's sort of he's used to scare people by the founders. He's the tool of the founders, and he's used to keep people in line. He's obviously this big flying 30-foot tall creature is pretty scary, but they don't see him a lot. They always sort of glimpse him out of the corner of their eye. But he's also was Elizabeth's jailer and Elizabeth's only companion, and she has a very complex relationship with him because I think you see in the demo, it's almost like the abusive ex-boyfriend shows up at the end. And she has this, if you've ever known somebody in an abusive relationship, it's quite complex. And I think you sense there's this weird relationship because he's both her only friend. He's the guy who brought her books growing up and, brought her food and was her only companion, sang to her maybe, but also was her jailer. And they have this very strange relationship, and he obviously has a connection with her. He's jealous, obviously, when he shows up. He's mad that she left him, that she left captivity to go off with Booker. He views Booker as the other man in a lot of ways. And it's a pretty strange dynamic going on, and you sort of get caught in the middle of it. It's relatively easy and relatively ineffectual to write a story about Booker and Elizabeth coming together and forming a relationship. And that's why one of the reasons I could cut to a cutscene and show them being, have two really attractive people, hanging out and being awesome together. But the game to me is going to work only if the player and Elizabeth form this bond. In the same way that in Bioshock 1, when the Ryan revelation happened, one of the reasons I think people were affected by it is because they felt that Ryan was telling them something that made them personally angry because it screwed with their own understanding of the experience they had been through. Bioshock Infinite will be out next year in 2012, and it will be on the PC, PS3, and Xbox 360.